Good evening, everyone, and thank you for listening to the Futurati Podcast, where we dive into how emerging technologies will impact the world and your bank account. I'm Trent Fowler, and joining me, as always, is my co-host, Thomas Fry. Thomas and I are futurists, keynote speakers, and consultants with decades of experience in analyzing trends and communicating new developments to audiences across the world. Reach out to us at futuratipodcast.com/contact-futurati if you'd like to hire us for consulting, to speak at your event, or to advertise on our podcast. Thomas, we just wrapped up an interview with Nat Eliason. This is one that I've wanted to do for quite a long time, but he happens to have a new book out, and Zoom's going to blur it, but it's called Crypto Confidential. You kind of get a sense for what the title is. It is a very readable, very engaging account of a couple of years, really hot years in crypto, 2021, 2022, where there was just this insane bull run. NFTs were popping off. It was a whole thing. And he was right in the heart of it. And he made tons of money and then lost tons of money and then made tons of money and went back and forth. And he does a really good job of just walking you through that narrative. He just tells the story. You know, it's almost like it's a fiction book, but it's describing real events. And it's fascinating. It's a really cool look at a really monumental time in the history of crypto. So we conducted this interview in order to talk about that. And near the end, we also discussed generative AI and a couple of other things. So Thomas, was there anything in particular about the interview that stood out to you?
Yeah, I like the story about how he, 2017, decided to have $100 automatically go into Bitcoin, and then he tucked it away and didn't look at it for several years, and then he realized that he hadn't seen that for a while. So he looks, wow, he's got $70,000 in there. That's I like those kind of surprises.
I love finding 70 grand. It's always great when I find $70,000 I didn't know I had. I agree. So getting his perspective on it was really, really interesting. And we also, talked a little bit about how you detect scams and how you deal with some of the ethical questions in crypto, but it just came through that he's a very thoughtful guy. He really cares about getting these things right. And it was just interesting to see his journey through this really tangled world that so many of us occupy. That's really hard to sort out.
Yeah. The whole crypto world is, suddenly became the next big thing. And then AI came along and suddenly became the next big thing, and everything about crypto kind of took a back seat for a while. Now it's kind of coming back again, but it's getting intermingled with AI. And so we're seeing lots of interesting things come out of that.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of the next big thing in crypto and AI, we actually covered all of that, crypto and AI, in this episode with Nat Eliason. So without further ado, we will let you listen to it. Tonight, we're joined by Nat Eliason. Nat began as a successful marketer and the founder of Growth Machine before turning to writing full-time. He recently published Crypto Confidential, an unfiltered insider's account of the hyperactive, hyper-speculative, hyper-addictive, nearly unregulated, completely insane world being built on the blockchain. If you enjoyed this interview, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends. And don't forget to check out our website, futuratipodcast.com. Nat, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to chat.
Absolutely, us as well. So I've been reading your forthcoming book, Crypto Confidential, and it's a lot of fun. It's very well written and very engrossing. And in particular, you do a really great job of capturing the terror and the thrill that comes with being deep into crypto and almost sending $300,000 of ETH to the wrong address. And since part of what you're here is, part of the reason that you're here is to promote the book, I thought we could start by just having you walk through some of the most memorable experiences for the book, or maybe the overall story you were trying to convey with it. However you want to begin. Let's just start with that.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you. I mean, the reason I wrote the book is I was working in crypto. I wasn't one of these crazy huge names. There were a lot of people who were working in similar levels as I was, but that was such an insane time period that end of 2020, 2021, 2022, there were, stimulus checks, there was the GameStop and AMC craze, there was just all of this like joy and celebration coming out of COVID, rampant speculation in so many industries, and crypto ended up becoming a big part of that story. And it was just such a wild time to be working in it, because I definitely believe, and different people agree to different degrees, that crypto is going to be a bigger and bigger part of the financial economy. That name is terrible. I think we're going to have to figure out another way to brand it, but it's going to become more of like the infrastructure for how we interact with the internet. And I felt like I had a unique opportunity to capture some of the insanity of both the speculative, gambling, more degenerate side, and the stresses of building financial-esque assets and tools in a completely new, unregulated, not entirely understood industry, and a lot of the craziness that went on with it. Because if it was a crypto 101, what is Bitcoin, what is ETH type book, I think it would have gotten stale very quickly. It would have been stale before I was done writing it, right? But it capturing kind of the craziness of living and working during that time period felt like something that might be very fun to reflect back on for the next, few decades. But the other thing I wanted to do is I wanted to make a why is crypto interesting or cool book that would appeal to people who have zero interest or understanding of crypto. And that's why we were talking a little bit before you got on. That's why I tried so hard to make it read like a fast-paced thriller. Just be really like fun and action-packed and punchy, and like, I wanted it to be a beach read, like a Patterson novel or something that just kind of like sneaks in the knowledge along the way. It's not the textbook, but if you know nothing about crypto and you pick it up, you're going to have a lot of fun and you're going to learn some things along the way.
Yeah, I definitely was there along with you as you were describing some of these things, and you're like, and my heart stopped. That line had to have shown it like 24 times. You're like, oh my God, I'm sending this to the wrong address, or I put the private
Not again
in the smart contract. Yeah, you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. What year did you first find out about Bitcoin, and what was your initial impression of it when you heard about it?
So I first found out about it very early, like either 2010 or 2011, purely because I was really big into gaming, and I had this monster tower PC for gaming. I wanted to run Crysis at full specs and everything. And my roommate, I'm glad I know a few people get that reference. My roommate at the time in high school, it was either my high school roommate or it was right after graduate. It was around then. He heard about Bitcoin mining on gaming computers. And so he had like set it up, and he said, hey, it's this like digital money that you can make on your gaming PC. And we installed the mining software and played with it for a day, and then said, oh, that was cool. And then like deleted it and never did anything with it. So
Believe that was $1,000,000 off the hard drive. Yeah.
I don't want to think about it, right? Like, and if we had just left it running for the next 3 years, we'd know it an island. But that was kind of like the first exposure. 2013 happened, and I heard it happening, but didn't really dive in at all. I was just like, oh shit, that was that thing that we were like talking about with our gaming computers a couple of years ago. And now it's actually worth something. And we were kind of joking, like, what if we'd stayed with it? But then it crashed, and I kind of wasn't, I kind of thought okay, that was like it was over. And then 2017, it comes back, and at that point, I had the benefit of that kind of being the third time it was hitting my radar, where I was like, oh, okay, there's something here. And I like dabbled in it a little bit, put some money into ICOs, lost all of that, of course. Initial coin offerings, new tokens that were being launched. And then most of them were scams and went to zero. But, I played around with that. Then the market crashed, and I was like, okay, this crash thing has happened at least in one big way once before, and it came back. It seems like there's something happening here, but I need to like go make money doing other work. I can't really explore this right now, and I don't even know what to explore. So I just went to Coinbase, and I set up a weekly recurring buy of Bitcoin. I said, just take $100 out of my bank account and put it into Bitcoin just every week. And I set that at like the end of 2017, and then I literally forgot about it. Like, I would see it coming out of my bank account when I looked at my bank account and stuff, but I just didn't think about it. And then end of 2020, I was leaving my work in my marketing agency and trying to figure out what to do next. And I start hearing the murmurings about crypto again. and I opened up my Coinbase, and it was like $70,000 or $80,000.
Wow.
The little bit that I had at the end of 2017, plus the $100 a week all the way through when it went down to 4K or whatever, had just turned into this ridiculous amount of money. And that's when I was like, okay, there's definitely going to be something more here. This story is going to happen again. Like, let's see where it goes.
You have my attention. $70,000.
Yes.
You have my attention.
I mean, I didn't know it was there. Like, I hadn't looked at my Coinbase account for years. And then I open it up and it's just, oh, what?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Nothing like almost finding six figures you'd forgotten all about to really make you sit up and take notice.
So crazy. Yeah.
So what makes Bitcoin different from the other cryptocurrencies?
So the thing that makes Bitcoin different is, to me, fundamentally, it's sort of its simplicity, right? Like the great thing about the Bitcoin blockchain is that it's very simple, and, predominantly for, seeing what address has what amount and then sending some of that amount to another address. And then all the security that's kind of like baked in to prevent, tokens getting double counted in anybody's wallet. And there it is, like layer 2 stuff being built on top of Bitcoin. There's the Lightning Network and these other things. But to me, what makes Bitcoin really special and really different is just like that simplicity. It's not really trying to do anything else at the base layer besides provide this provably scarce digital analog for gold, which in its creation allowed for something that you could never do on the internet before, which was make a digital version of a cash payment, right? Like, I can walk up to you on the street and give you $20, and now you have $20 and nobody else has to know about it, right? Like, we didn't have to tell anybody about that transaction, but there's never been a way to transact like that online. And so it's very cool that Satoshi and, whoever is under that umbrella figured out a way to create a version of that where you could actually move money online without having to go through a third party like a bank or a money wire service or whatever else.
Hello, this is Trent Fowler, co-host of the Futurati podcast. One of the most common pieces of marketing advice I've come across is to know your audience and give them what they want. One difficulty in podcasting is that it's actually pretty hard to do this. None of the major platforms give us any way to reach out to you, our listeners, to find out what you enjoy about the Futurati podcast and what you'd like to see done differently. So we've decided to record this commercial and ask you directly to reach out to us. Head over to futuratipodcast.com, go to the contact page, and drop us a line. Tell us about your favorite and least favorite episodes, what you'd like to see us cover in the future, and anything else you want us to know. We produce this show for you, and we want your advice so we can make it even better. Thank you.
Yeah. I think all that.
Go ahead. Did you have to buy your initial Bitcoin with Linden dollars?
No, I didn't.
The last guest was Andrew Bailey, and he said that's how he got his first Bitcoin, was with Linden dollars and Second Life. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, it's funny you mentioned Second Life, though, because that was the other thing that actually made me so bullish on crypto is, going back to like my gaming era, people were playing these games like World of Warcraft and Diablo and buying items that were worth thousands of dollars in the real world just to like show off that they had them in the game. And so that was what made me kind of interested in the NFT and gaming side of crypto, because we'd already seen that story play out in these very hacked together gray markets many times for decades. Even going back to the 90s, people were trying to spend money for digital status. And so if there's now an actual infrastructure for people to do that, and now we're all so much more online, the idea of an expensive digital status symbol, I think, is actually going to get bigger and bigger and bigger.
Well, why don't we stick with that thing? Because that's actually one of my questions. You talked about digital luxury items in the book. That was one of the things you talked about, and you had a Bored Ape NFT for a little bit. So, I mean, how do you think about the NFT phenomenon? It's one of those things that I think just has people scratching their heads. It's like, well, it's people will pay $1 million for this, but I just don't understand. Can't you copy the picture? Which I get, but on the other hand, it's clear from decades of evidence that people will just spend a lot of money on this stuff. So, how do you think about that phenomenon?
I mean, one, the luxury goods market is massive, right? Tens of billions of dollars. People will spend thousands of dollars on a Birkin bag, even though a plastic bag can carry the same amount of of goods, right? Because it's like luxury objects and status symbols are like valuable to us. It's part of how we differentiate ourselves. It's part of how we signal which groups we're in. It's part of how we gain membership to different groups, explicitly or implicitly. And as we spend more and more time online, it feels very obvious to me that digital status symbols are going to become a bigger and bigger thing. And they already are. If you look at like Fortnite and Roblox, people already spend billions of dollars a year on purely cosmetic items, things just to make their character look different when they're playing with their friends. And it's like, that's a multi-billion-dollar a year market already. And what was interesting with NFTs was that it was the first time that there was a digital status symbol of some sort. And I mean, with a Bored Ape or CryptoPunk or whatever, the what you're signaling is that you have a lot of money or that you were very early to crypto or like one of those two. But what was interesting about it was that it was removed from any one environment. So if you spend $20 on a skin in Fortnite, only other people who play Fortnite get to see it. And really only the people who are in the game at the same time as you get to see it. So it's like 200 people at a time or 100 people at a time. Whereas if you owned a Bored Ape or a CryptoPunk and you made that your Twitter profile picture or your LinkedIn profile picture, everybody got to see it, right? So you might be reaching millions of people a week with your status symbol compared to the hundreds at a time that you were in these games. And obviously, there was a ton of just like hype and mania around those kinds of assets during that time period. Who knows if Bored Apes will ever be worth what they were worth? Who knows if CryptoPunks will be worth what they're worth? But I do think that idea that you could have something that you can show off anywhere online that proves you're a member of some community or have some kind of status is going to be a thing. Now, that said, it obviously got kind of a bad rep and left a bad taste in everyone's mouth with how high it got and how hard it fell and how many just low effort, shitty derivatives there were of just ridiculous profile pictures and ridiculous NFTs that were commanding big amounts of money, promising games and all these things that never delivered, celebrities launching them. It was clearly like a cash grab as it got crazier and crazier. But that doesn't mean that the underlying idea isn't good and couldn't become something eventually.
Yeah, I think it's a broadening of the idea of playing the status game. Human beings are status-driven animals, and that's obviously, we're constantly playing these hierarchical games and trying to find our place in the pecking order, and items like conspicuous consumption is a great way of doing that. And with something like an NFT, it can tag to you and follow you around the internet, whereas a skin can't. I think that's very insightful. Do you have any thoughts as to where that will go in the future? Because I know there's been a lot of speculation about this over the years. And a couple of years back, people were talking about NFTs that would go across different games. You'd have an item that they could transport across different games. They'd have interoperable protocols for going back and forth and switching items. I haven't followed that very carefully. You probably know better than me because you're more plugged into gaming. But I'm just curious as to whether or not you've seen an evolution of those use cases of anything interesting happening with NFTs.
Yeah, the gaming and NFTs relationship is interesting. I'll say a few different things on it. One, that idea in particular, I've always found like slightly silly, just because when you make a game like World of Warcraft, right, there's an incredible amount of choice and like strategy that goes into like what items are allowed in that environment, not to mention a whole design ethos around them. And so you want to create this cohesive experience for your game. So you can't just let any item come into it, because you would have to create designs for every single item from every other game. You'd have to figure out how to balance it against every other item in the game. It would just feel like a total mess. But there is a kind of like a mini version of that is super interesting, which is, imagine that your World of Warcraft and your Fortnite account or whatever are all linked to your crypto wallet. And so if you go to my crypto wallet, you can see my Fortnite, my World of Warcraft items. Like, that's a little bit interesting because I could show my best items in different games off in one spot. And that gets a little interesting. Where it gets more interesting is if a new game launches, they could actually give out certain items and things in their game to new players who can prove that they have these items in other games. And if the items are represented by NFTs, they can sort of instantly prove that. And that allows the new game to bootstrap its player base by giving out free items to people who are already active in similar games. And that's kind of a neat way to use it because the existing games don't need to give them permission, really, right? Like they don't have to do any work. They don't have to like contribute to it, but the new game can see like, oh, Nat has this item, so I'm going to give him this item in this game because I know that means he's an active player over there. And this is a good way to incentivize him. So that version I can totally see, but I can also just see the items themselves never really becoming NFTs, but these games making their marketplaces composable with a broader crypto economy. So, imagine in Fortnite, you've got all of your skins and things, you've got all of your items. If you could trade those on a Fortnite marketplace for, I think their currency is V-Bucks, right? And then you have your V-Bucks in your wallet, and every time you sell or buy a skin, Fortnite takes, call it 10% of that transaction. And then if V-Bucks is represented by an actual crypto token, which you can swap with USDC, you could basically instantly move your money between different games. And on the one hand, they might not want you to be able to like pull your value out of the game. But if in one click, I can send my World of Warcraft money over to Fortnite to like buy this item I really want, it suddenly opens up all of the game's economies quite a bit and adds this like, or removes this barrier where you don't have to like do a credit card transaction every time you want to buy something. You don't have to keep reloading your casino chips. You kind of get to like keep bringing them around. And because they can take, some transaction fee on each trade, they're going to be making a bunch of money on the back end off of their own token as well. So there would be good incentives for them to do it as more games adopt something like that.
Like free trade in the metaverse. It's just all
exactly
come down. And I'm just thinking like it would be crazy. You could gold farm over here in World of Warcraft, transfer that over to this. Like what people would do with that, it would be almost worth it just for that reason alone, just to see like what these crazy cracked out nerds do with like their 20-hour stints of playing game. How would they hack that? Or like crash markets and like the market manipulation you'd see it'd be a lot of fun to watch, I think.
I think it'd be fascinating. And I think people would really get into it because you already see people try to do this. They'll sell their World of Warcraft characters on eBay. They'll, try to broker deals for rare items. I remember this same roommate, he was a moderator on the Dota 2 subreddit. And so he was one of the guys who would facilitate these like $1,000, $10,000 transactions for rare items because there was no marketplace. So like he and the two people who wanted to make the deal would have to get in a group chat. One person would send him the money, the other person would send him the item, and then he would distribute it to them because that was the closest thing to a marketplace there was. But people wanted a marketplace so badly that they hacked one together with middlemen. And so you can imagine how much more transacting would happen if there were a real marketplace. Now, here's where the like gaming NFT stuff got really stupid though, which is like Dota 2 is a great example here because they actually have a marketplace. They have a real money marketplace where you can buy and sell items from the game. Every item is worth like $2. Like there are some really rare ones that are worth hundreds or maybe a couple that are in the thousands. Most of them are $2 to $5. So during the mania, all these crypto games are launching and it's like every character is worth $5,000 and like this shoe in Step In is worth $10,000. Everything is so insanely expensive and that's not sustainable. Like there's no way that that's the future, but a much toned down version where you're buying and selling things for $2, $5, $10, $20, that seems super realistic.
And it seems like you could take some of the like the market involved in like collectibles. I've been watching the show King of Collectibles, which is a really great show where it's this guy sells these like $22 million baseball cards and stuff like that. You could have a digital version of that. And it's fascinating. Your roommate, he's like a market maker and escrow, it all rolled into one. But yeah, if people are just clearly chipping away at the stone, trying as hard as they can to build a market for it, well, then there's probably a market there for it, right? And if NFTs are part of the plumbing that facilitates all that, well, there's got like, even if it's not going to be as valuable as it was during its mania, there's got to be some use case there where people would be willing to buy into it and facilitate it.
Totally.
Yeah, at some point in the past, the IRS didn't really understand crypto at all. And
at some point in the past. Whereas today they have a firm hand.
Then they figured out how to tax it. How did do you know what year that was, and how did that instantly changed the way crypto was being viewed and thought of and implemented.
And it's kind of an evolving thing. The challenge is that the IRS has very clear rules now for buying and selling Bitcoin and Ethereum in particular, because they're both recognized as commodities. And, we know how to tax purchases and sales of commodities, right? And you got to know what you paid for it. You got to know what you sell it for. You report any profit. It's either short-term, long-term cap gains. It's like relatively a simple process. And that side of it is pretty well established, and we'll figure it out. The challenge during this period was that there were all of these other things happening in crypto that, one, the IRS had not created any rules for, because they were being invented like month by month. So there's no way they could. I mean, they still haven't really issued rules for any of these things. Like, none of us know if we have paid the right amount of taxes. And so everybody basically had to just like pick a spot on the risk curve. Like, do I go really conservative, probably overpay, but get to sleep at night? Like, that's what I chose to do. And I'm very happy I chose to do it. Or do you go full risk and say, if there's no rules, I don't have to pay taxes on this. I just pay nothing. Because there were just all of these ridiculous things that are part of how crypto works that there just aren't clear rules for. I'll give one example. There are these wonderful applications called like decentralized lending protocols. So if you have a bunch of Ethereum, you could deposit your Ethereum in a tool like Aave. And when it's in Aave, you earn a small amount of interest. And then you could borrow USDC against it. So if you think that ETH is going to just keep going up forever and you have a lot of it, you might park it there and just borrow enough to pay your bills and things while it keeps going up. Or, you borrow some to speculate on some new launch or whatever, right? Like, this is basically how you can take out a portfolio line of credit from a normal bank. There's just no bank. It's all code. And you can do it like instantly. It's really cool. The problem is that when you put your ETH into Aave, Aave gives you a token to represent your deposit. So they send you something called AE, which basically is just a receipt. It just says that Nat deposited this much in Aave, he can take this much back out. But on the like blockchain level, what it looks like happened is I traded my ETH to Aave for this AE token, which kind of looks like a taxable event. So you have this question that it's like, is the IRS going to understand that that was more like a bank deposit and not a trade? Or are they just going to look at everything and say, all of those things were trades, you have to pay taxes every time you deposit it into Aave? I know what they should do. They should see it as a deposit. It shouldn't be a transaction. But are they going to? Can you fight that, right? Like, what even happens? Like, we literally have no idea. So there were just all of these questions along the way, and those are still open questions. We still don't have answers on them.
Yeah.
So
in the meantime, yeah.
Describe kind of the different environments for crypto around the world, because I see the U.S. as being very anti-crypto, and countries like Japan being very pro-crypto. Can you just talk a little bit about how this is evolving around the world?
Yeah. The first interesting thing is that the U.S. seems to have shifted quite a bit in the last few weeks. And I think what a lot of politicians realize, it's something like 20 million Americans own, or 50 million Americans own some amount of crypto, and 20 million say it's important to them that their politician is in favor of crypto. And the crypto, the crypto lobbying arm has, it's got to be hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to deploy at getting politicians elected. And Trump came out a few weeks ago as super pro-crypto, and the support and the amount of donations that has garnered him has been pretty incredible to see. And, we saw this big shift in Congress a few weeks ago where the Ethereum ETF got approved basically out of nowhere. Like, nobody expected it to happen. And then just poof, it happened. And then two bills got passed, one got vetoed, but it was this really quick shift. And I think that for a long time, American politicians saw crypto in two ways. One, this is something criminals use to hide what they're doing, which, look, to be fair, that's most of what it was used for in the very early days. That was like Silk Road and, foreign actors who didn't want to transact in dollars and moved Bitcoin around instead. And like, yeah, I mean, way more of the black market still happened in cash, but Bitcoin did make it easier. But as it's continued to like become more valuable, as more people have bought and invested in it, it's adopted all these other like users and use cases that aren't criminal. It's gotten more popular acceptance, and the politicians have kind of had to adjust to it. I think the other thing that they're probably realizing, and that is probably getting trickled out to them through the lobbying arm, is that crypto almost has this potential to really cement the dollar as the world's currency, because the most, cryptocurrencies are typically denominated in their US dollar value. And aside from Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Solana, the next biggest tokens are US dollar stablecoins. They're Tether and USDC, both of which are pegged to the US dollar, and both of which are used for billions of dollars of transactions, all again denominated in the dollar. And that is a US dollar equivalent that anybody in the world can immediately use to buy basically anything with anybody else who will accept it. And it protects people in all these other countries from the inflation of their local currencies. So, Argentina has been a really interesting use case for this, because there are a lot of incredibly smart engineers who live in Argentina and work there, but they don't want to hold the Argentinian peso just because of inflation. So they get their paycheck, they convert it to, Ether, Bitcoin, or whatever, basically immediately. And then they'll also convert most of it to USDC, because then they're just holding US dollars. And I mean, now you can do this crazy thing where you can literally take your USDC and convert it to a US Treasury token. Because like BlackRock is buying US Treasuries, holding them in reserve, issuing these Treasury tokens. And so now everybody in the world
tokenizing treasuries. They're tokenizing treasuries.
Yeah, it's super cool. I mean, literally within, the day you get your paycheck, 10 minutes later, you could just be holding US Treasuries, even if you're living in the middle of nowhere in like sub-Saharan Africa, right? Like, that's awesome.
This reminds me a little bit of the conversation we had with Lynn Alden about it. It's almost like Bretton Woods 4. You've got like a crypto dollar system where they set up the petrodollar system, where they went and they said, listen, we will protect the Middle East and the shipping lanes and the sea lanes and all that, but you got to denominate all this stuff in dollars, which drove demand for dollars, which had various deleterious consequences. I mean, many of the people I know who've thought very carefully about it say that wasn't actually good for us in the long run, but there's no denying that it strengthened the dollar, especially abroad, right? So if somehow the government could come in and say, well, you got to denominate the stuff in dollars, you'd have, the petrodollar system part 2. It's like the new wave of this, which I don't think we should do, but it's interesting to think about.
But it has to make it more appealing to them that, oh, this isn't a threat to the US currency. Like, USD is not going to be replaced by Bitcoin. I don't buy that story. But crypto could be the rails for the US dollar to become the de facto currency for all internet transactions. And that's kind of appealing if you're, focused on maintaining, US's power and influence over the world.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. That's something I'll have to think more about. We touched on some of that with Matt Pines. He's written a lot about the the national security angle of Bitcoin and why it's something that you should be thinking about from that perspective. His basic thesis was that we export American values and innovation and all of this, the standard story, but this strikes me as another interesting angle that might be worth getting into.
Wow. So what's the number one thing, if you could change something about Bitcoin, what would it be?
If I could change something about Bitcoin, what would it be?
You would put Satoshi's face on it?
I'd have more of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would do a stock split. I feel like that could be worthwhile. Just people, I think people don't like buying a tiny fraction of something, and so you could have all of the same rules, but have it be 21 billion instead of 21 million, and just give everyone an extra, multiply their balance by 1,000, just so that people can feel like they can own a whole one. I feel like that feels better, but I mean, that's purely a cosmetic thing. Functionally, honestly, I think that's what's so great about Bitcoin is like, I don't think you need to change much of anything. There is definitely some question around how the security is going to work in the future as the miner rewards decrease. And if that, opens it up, I'm not an expert in that. And so I definitely wouldn't be the person to talk about it. But that's the only serious criticism I've heard of its architecture. I mean, it's a weird story. It's just so weird that this anonymous person or group of people released this thing into the world, which might become a new store of value on par or greater than gold. And we just don't know who it is. And they just disappeared off the face of the earth shortly after releasing it. Like I think the Hal Finney theory is a good one just because he did die around that time. And that would explain it and put a nice bow on it. But even, for a while, I think you could have said, well, all the coins in the Satoshi wallets are a big vulnerability because if those start moving, that could crash the market, and then people will be worried about who actually holds this. But I feel like at this point, it's cemented itself in so much of people's consciousness as a possible store of value that even if that happened, it would crash the market for a little bit, but it wouldn't destroy the narrative. I feel like people just keep getting more confident in it, and like it works. It's a good product.
So there's that famous quote that Banksy gave that he said, nobody cared about me till they didn't know who I was.
Mm.
So I actually think Banksy invented Bitcoin.
I like that. I mean, there is something just romantic about it, right? Just what a beautiful story, It's almost hard to accept that it's true sometimes when you really think about it.
Yeah, we have the semi-mythical founder. It's got almost a religious ring to it all, the way it works. And we've speculated a lot actually in talking to different people about the role that kind of narrative has played in the success of Bitcoin. I mean, it has an unparalleled design, and there's many things about it that make it attractive apart from that. But just the fact that story is so captivating, and everyone likes to speculate about it and think about it. It's like, I wonder how much that has contributed to bringing Bitcoin into broader adoption and broader consciousness.
I mean, I think that it created the religious obsession with it in the beginning that was necessary to get it out of those early days, right? Because, gold obviously has some other uses. It's a great conductor, it's jewelry, all these other things. And so there was some other use for gold. Like Bitcoin is literally useless if everybody doesn't believe it has value. And so it had to, not useless, you could still use it for transacting and other things, but like it needed there to be that faith in it in the beginning for it to get out of those early, like low value stages, for it to be accepted by more and more people. And it having this immaculate conception element to it, I think really helps with creating those initial true believers.
Yeah, it's the only secular religious movement I can think of, off the top of my head. I can't think of another time a ploy like that has worked, because Satoshi's commitment to anonymity did that for him. And I mean, if it was Hal Finney, obviously he had the advantage of dying around that time. It's easy to be anonymous if you're not around.
Yeah.
But it's the only one that I can think of offhand that's like a secular religious movement almost. It's like an awakening.
Yeah, it's just so cool. And what a crazy thing to have happened in our life.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are some of the common misconceptions about Bitcoin that you run into?
Are you enjoying this episode of the Futurati podcast? If so, please like it, give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with your friends. By far, the best way to help us grow is to spread the word on social media, which will expose our content to more people and help us continue to bring you interviews with world-leading experts in AI, quantum computing, cryptocurrencies, and so much more. Thank you in advance.
I guess the first one that comes to mind is the energy usage. Okay. I know that's a big concern to a lot of people, and I think it's a fair concern because it would be better if it didn't use so much energy. I mean, you could actually make the argument that the reason it's secure is because it uses so much energy, although that's a hard thing to tell somebody whose problem is the amount of energy being used. Although I do find that argument compelling, but it's not a good argument because you're basically saying like, no, you're like not giving a good counter. The better, I think, counter to that concern is how much interesting work has been done around renewable energy and around like energy efficiency to support Bitcoin mining and how it's driven some of those industries. So I live in Texas, and there are a few companies here who have basically built Bitcoin miners onto I'm a little out of my technical depth here, but it's either, I think it's oil refineries or oil rigs. And basically there will be situations where they have to just like burn off excess oil, right? They just have to flare it because they have too much. And they can just attach Bitcoin miners to that, and they can mine Bitcoin instead of just like wasting all of this energy. And there's been, other projects like that where it's like, okay, we're not actually using tons of net new energy. We're finding ways to turn unused energy into like economic value and economic security for other people in the world who maybe don't have the option of just walking down the street to Chase Bank and putting their money in something safe and secure. And that's pretty cool. I think you could also make, this is a kind of a crazy argument, but again, kind of a compelling one, which is that the demand for Bitcoin, the demand for energy to mine Bitcoin has pushed so many companies to develop more efficient ways of creating energy that it, along with like AI and NVIDIA, are kind of driving this new like nuclear revolution that we're seeing. Because we had this long era, the Henry Adams curve started flattening in the 70s. We stopped getting more energy per capita around the world. We got a lot more efficient, but that might have caused a lot of stagnation in certain areas. And now we have this very clear thing, like if you can make more energy for cheaper, you can literally immediately turn it into money. And that's motivating a lot of people to figure out how to make more cheap energy, which is helping with solar, nuclear, like all these things that we're now seeing come online that could actually pull back the climate change curve pretty dramatically, way faster than people thought possible. So it is this interesting thing where like sometimes using more of a resource actually drives the creation of much more of it and drives down the price and all these other benefits.
Yeah, it incentivizes exploration and development, which then increases the supply. And it's almost like as opposed to the bad money trap, it's like the good resource not trap, the opposite of a trap, the good resource.
Yeah,
for booners, it's like a gift and good. But for energy, I don't know. This is all horribly not thought out. But yeah, as you're saying that, there's something very plausible about that. It's probably worth thinking about that.
Well, there's a good analog here with like regenerative agriculture. I don't know how deep you guys have gone on that rabbit hole, but this whole process of instead of like monocropping land and using aggressive fertilizers and pesticides, you try to grow crops the way we used to with tons of cover crops and animals and rotational grazing and all these things. And when that was pitched as you should make less money, but do this because it's good for the environment, like no farmer is going to do it. But then
no thanks.
People started, yeah, like, no.
I decline.
Yeah, but then people figured out, starting with White Oak and some of these other guys, they figured out like, wait, you can actually get more crops by doing this. You can actually, like, yes, there's going to be this short-term pain, but there's going to be this long-term pain because not only is it giving you more yield from your land, but it's also improving like our soil health and, reducing our risks of like, sudden dust bowl type issues and all these other benefits that are, but, that can be rooted at start with just an economic incentive.
Yeah, it always seems that we don't hear anymore about how much energy is being used to mine Bitcoin when AI is just
yeah, in my beer.
What's funny because the energy was going to the same place. It was going to GPUs.
Yeah,
it was like first was Bitcoin and now it's NVIDIA the whole time.
Right.
Well, if it incentivizes the build out of nuclear, then I would say it's obviously a huge net positive. I mean, if this is the thing that pushes it over the edge and we build out, 500% or 1,000% more nuclear capacity just to slake the demand for nearly unlimited amounts of energy for these two use cases, then on that basis alone, even if all the rest of it craps out, it's worth it. It was worth the experiment.
Totally.
So you've been in the crypto space for a while. Do you have any advice for people who are trying to develop better feelers for what are scams, what are rug pulls, and what are legitimate projects? At this point, you're bound to have seen a few dozen of all of them. And I have done technical writing and developer relations and marketing and stuff for crypto firms. I've faced kind of the same thing. It's like, well, it sounds good and the white paper is well written, but at the end of the day, it's not like I read the code, or it's not like I would even know if there was some super subtle little thing happening here. So just what high level advice do you have for somebody trying to assess the validity of a project?
I mean, the first thing that I tell basically anybody who's thinking of trying to figure that out is that if you're not going to quit your job and spend 12, 14, 16-hour days in Discord and Telegram and Twitter, just drinking from the crypto fire hose and trying to understand every single thing going on, you're probably not going to develop good enough intuition for that stuff. And you should just hold the majors and not look at them. Because I think people really get stuck trying to, like, oh, I'm just going to load up my Solana wallet with a few $100 and like day trade some meme coins on the side. You can do that and like that's fun. But if you're going to put any serious money on the line, you better be 100% all in, because really the answer to your question is like vibes. Like you just develop a sixth sense for it. You look at so many projects, you look at so many Discords, so many white papers. I like part of why I started teaching myself how to code Solidity was I wanted to be able to look at the contracts to figure out if it was a rug pull or not, because I didn't want to always have to trust an auditor or trust somebody else to do the research for me. And if you're not going to be like that committed to it when it's still in this sort of like infancy figuring itself out phase, you're probably just going to lose a lot of money, and like you maybe shouldn't even like take the risk. That said, it is fun to like read about these things and try to figure out what's going on with them. And so your next proxy is just like, how big is it already? And that's not a great proxy because obviously there have been massive things that turn into scams. But maybe the better question is, how big was it during the bear market when nobody cared about crypto, right? Because if everybody who was still there doing things after 2022, if they were using it and they were excited about it, there might be something there. But if we have another crypto cycle at the end of 24 or in 2025, and there's some hot new app that, your cousin's telling you about, like, maybe be a little more cautious there.
We need like a bear market density index.
Bear market index. Yeah. That would probably do pretty well. It's like if you add the things that get launched during the bear market and then you cut it off as soon as Bitcoin hits an all-time high, and like you just hold those things through the mania and you don't buy anything new that launches.
Like an
not a terrible strategy.
Yeah, it's like an anti-fragile portfolio you're building.
Something kind of like that. I'd love somebody to run a back test on that, because you would have bought Solana and Avalanche and Luna and Polygon and all of the ones that went just ballistic last time. You would have had to exit, right? You could totally create some rule where, once the Bitcoin's at 2x all-time high, you start selling down 1% each day. But like, you could do worse than a strategy like that for sure.
Interesting. Okay. There was another question I wanted to ask you that's sort of related to this. And in the book, you relayed an incident in which there was this influencer that wanted you to help with the token launch, and you kind of struggled with it because you felt as though you were really just sort of pumping out a project for the exit liquidity, and you felt kind of bad about that. It wasn't really something you wanted to be involved in. And that's also something I've kind of struggled with. So I didn't know if you had any deep insights on the ethical dimensions of doing something like that. I mean, it's like, at the end of the day, it's crypto. You know what you're getting into. You're all adults. Hopefully you didn't get cheated or you didn't mortgage your house on this, but I don't know what to tell you. On the other hand, it's like, is this the best use of my time doing something like this, even if I could make a lot of money? So I didn't know if you thought about that at all.
Yeah. What ultimately made me... Oh, do you still have you?
No, I'm here. I have to try to
okay,
cool. Sometimes.
What ultimately made me feel weird in that situation is that you're right. A lot of people in crypto understand that when you're in that mania with crazy new things launching and you're trying to buy low and sell high, you kind of understand it's a game. It's a little bit of a casino game. You're kind of gambling here. It's very aggressive speculation. But when, in that case, when it was like a big Twitter influencer whose audience was not crypto people, and so funny backstory, I actually got reached out to by like 3 or 4 people. I condensed them into one person, but 3 or 4 different people reached out to me in the span of a week, who all had Twitter audiences that were like not crypto audiences. They all wanted to launch NFT projects. And I was like, this is not good. And the reason it made me uncomfortable was that like their audiences weren't crypto people. They didn't know what game they were playing. They didn't know what they were getting themselves into. And so they were totally just going to end up like losing everything on it, most likely. Some of the early ones might make money, they could sell the top, whatever. But when you start get like the people who end up losing a lot are it's the dumb money who come in late because they start seeing all the hype online. They weren't there in the bear market. They weren't there early. They're just seeing it from the outside, feeling FOMO, and then rushing in to buy whatever this influencer is shilling them. And, I literally feel zero remorse about taking crypto money from somebody else in crypto if we're both trying to gamble on NFTs, right? It's like, we know what game we're playing, right? That's part of the fun of it. But when you're deliberately trying to just mine non-crypto people for money, that's when it starts to feel a little more questionable, for sure. But that ended up being very useful that all those guys reached out to me, because that told me that the NFT market was like hitting a top. It was hitting a peak. It was like, this is definitely when we should be getting out. Like, things are getting really stupid here. And that turned out to be really good timing for that phase of the market.
Grandma's trying to buy a Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT. So that's all right. That's it.
Yeah.
Get you back inside, Grandma.
I mean, I'll tell you this funny story. I was at dinner last week with a friend in New York City, and that we had a kind of talkative waiter, and we were talking about crypto stuff, and he came by and he was like, he said something like, oh, you don't need to buy crypto anymore. Like, you can just invest in NVIDIA. That thing just keeps going up. And we, after he left, we were both like, that's a sell signal. Like, you got it. Like, that is when you sell NVIDIA. And that was literally June 20th, which was the top for NVIDIA, like, based on the current time of recording. It might go way up from there, but it was just so funny to, like, we both had that immediate instinct, like, oh yeah, if the waiter is shilling you something, like, you sell everything.
All right. So we like to ask weird and off the wall questions. So if you had the opportunity to design a crypto slot machine, what features would it have that our current slot machines do not have?
Centralized.
It's so bad that my head immediately goes here, but you could very easily set it up so that you just connect your wallet when you go into the casino, and then if you run out of chips, you can borrow against your long-term holdings to keep playing at the casino. So, imagine if when you went into Vegas, they also, like, knew what your house was worth, and you could just gamble against the value of your house. Like, that wouldn't be very hard to build in crypto.
So just a life-destroying machine.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the slot machines can empty out your bank account, but this slot machine could take your house and your kid's college fund too.
Oh man, yeah, that's I wouldn't build that. If you couldn't handle that to build something like that,
that would be awful.
Terrible. I couldn't live with myself after that. Yeah, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about generative AI because you pivoted from crypto bro to AI bro now. In the standard pattern.
That's not fair. I'm not an AI. The standard. I use it, but
you'll be an AI bro before long. You'll be an AI influencer. 99% of people are using ChatGPT, Ron, just so you know.
Sure. Yeah. So all these sentences.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, I don't know, just your thoughts on the technology. I know you're pretty bullish on it. I believe, I haven't followed this super closely. You built some kind of product around it, or you used a product to build, or you used it to build your most recent product. I know you're really involved with it. So I'm just curious as to what it's like day to day for you, where you think that tech's going. Let's spend a little time on that.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't actually, like, tried to build any, like, influence around AI. Like, honestly, I'm not super interested in that side of it. I am interested in how I can use it to improve my existing workflow. And, there's definitely a lot of hype around it, but I have found it pretty incredibly useful in two domains in particular. One is I'm a very, like, hobby developer, very hobby engineer, not an expert, never had any formal training, but I like programming. It's fun. And I'm mostly a writer. And so it's a nice way to, like, use a very different part of my brain. And so I when I finished Crypto Confidential and I had some downtime and I kept hearing about these AI powered programming tools, I was like, okay, like, how good is this really? Can this really help that much programming, or is it all hype? And I had this idea for an app because I've been working on Crypto Confidential, and I had gone from being in the Discords, in the mania, the nonstop, like, buying, selling craziness, to literally, like, sitting alone in my office writing a book with, like, zero, there's, like, no reward mechanism there. You don't, like, win anything every day. You're not, like, talking to people. It's kind of been draining. And so I like made a spreadsheet. I just tracked my words every day in the spreadsheet, and that was my like little win, my proof that I did something. And so I said, okay, well, what if I use these AI tools to try to build a writing tracking app, kind of like Strava, but for writers? Like, let's see if I could actually do it. And I mean, dude, I was blown away by how easy they made it to pick up programming to build a mobile app. I basically had a pretty bare bones version of it done in like 2.5 weeks, and was able to throw it up on test flight and invite other people on Twitter to come use it with me, and they can start tracking their writing sessions. And I basically tracked every writing session I've done this year using that app that I built. And that's actually been super rewarding. Like, I love having it. And was able to just like hack the whole thing together using Cursor and what bit of JavaScript I already knew. And it's like, anytime I get stuck, I just ask ChatGPT what to do next. It reads the code base. It tells me if I have an error, I can paste the error in. It can help me debug it. And the thing I was worried about, the thing I was scared of was that it would make me worse. It would just make me lazy, because I wouldn't be having to problem solve anymore. But I actually found the opposite. What I found was that once I started asking a similar question a couple of times, I kind of learned it by osmosis. It kind of just like subtly installed itself in my brain, and I didn't have to ask how to do that anymore. And so it's this very interesting way of learning that you get a version of it if you're like going to Substack and hunting for the answers and then copying stuff over. But watching ChatGPT rewrite my code to make it work, and then me testing it, and then me reading what it wrote to try to figure it out, like, I actually learned a ton, and I got faster and faster as I went. So that was super cool. That really sold me that there was something here for, one, a big engineering team having maybe fewer people because everybody's more productive, or there being a bunch of like companies of 1 or 2 people who can do the work of what used to be 5 or 10 people, because these tools are getting better and better at handling some of these little pieces. So that got me super excited, and I still use it. It's like when I'm taking a break from drafting the next book or doing crypto confidential work, I'll hack on my app a little bit, hop back in, and the cool thing is it keeps getting better and better. Like, yeah, I was running into issues with it, so I set it aside for a couple months. Then I came back, and GPT 4.0 had launched, and it was like, or GPT or Claude 3 had launched, and it was way better than what I was getting with GPT 4. I was like, oh, this actually solves some of the problems I was dealing with. Like, I don't need to hire a coach. I just need to wait 3 months. Yeah, I totally get better, and then it'll fix my problems for me.
Do you need a dynamic and knowledgeable speaker for an event? Thomas Fry and me, Trent Fowler, are both seasoned keynote speakers, able to converse on a wide array of topics to audiences of all sizes and skill levels. Go to the contact page at futuraudiopodcast.com to book Thomas or myself today, and let us apply our years of experience in public speaking to make your event a smashing success.
That's pretty wait and see approach to software development.
Yeah. And I've been transitioning to fiction writing. That's sort of my next focus, is writing a novel. And one, there's parts of that I'm good at from doing Crypto Confidential, because it has this, it's a narrative, it's got this thriller-esque energy to it. And so I had to learn how to do all of that. But writing a novel is this like whole other beast, and there's a lot of parts that I'm not good at. And so using Claude in particular as an editor and pasting in a section and saying like, hey, this scene feels kind of dry, can you help me make it more descriptive? And then it'll spit a bunch out, and 80% of what it gives isn't great, but that 20% is pretty good. And that often inspires me to rewrite it in my way, in a way that is like legitimately better. And I never could have gotten that feedback unless I had like hired a writing coach, and then I would have had to wait a couple of days to get the feedback back, and it would have been a much slower process. But just working with Claude, I've gotten a lot better, a lot faster, because I can immediately get those little tweaks and bits of feedback, and it's super powerful for that too.
So are you internalizing the lessons in fiction writing the same way you were with coding?
It's really cool. It's just downloading itself in my brain somehow. Like, I don't understand how it's happening. It's just, I do it a few times, and then I start noticing that I'm actually getting better at the thing that I was asking it to help me with. And so early on in the novel, I was using it a lot. It was like, I'd constantly be getting stuck and constantly be asking for help. Like, how do I do this? How do I describe this? What should this dialogue be? Blah, blah, blah. And then as I got towards the end of the first draft, I was using it less. And then I started the second draft and it needed an extra like 50,000 words, needed a whole second point of view. And for that second point of view, I barely used it at all because it had gotten a lot more natural and I'd gotten so much like quick education just going back and forth like that, that I think it leveled me up way faster than I could have in almost any other situation. Because even if I took like an MFA program and was in like a small, salon style classroom, you're only meeting a couple times a week. You're getting feedback on like one short story or something. The amount of feedback you're getting is really small. But if you can query Claude for 20 cents a question to get detailed feedback on, each 500 word piece, and the feedback is good and useful, you can run that all day. You learn so much so fast. It's really, really exciting as a learning tool.
Fascinating. Do you think that's going to be one of the major use cases of it going forward?
That's a good question. I mean, you have to be motivated enough to use it that way, right? It's like I'm a little unusual that I have fun, like pushing myself in that way all day, and like trying to write better and better, trying to use it to get better and better. And like I don't know what percentage of people are that motivated. If they are, they're definitely going to be able to use it for that. I think a lot of people are hoping it will just do the work for them and just like spit out the whole chapter, and then they don't have to do any work. And I mean, I've tried really, really, really hard to tune it and prompt it and whatever to get it to like do the writing for me. It can't do that. It's just shit. It's just not good. You have to have the taste. You have to know how to edit it and how to tweak it. But maybe eventually it'll be able to just like, you can, feed it your idea for a beat and it writes the beat. You present the next beat, it does the next beat. You just write a whole book like that over the course of a week or something. I can see that world existing probably in the not too distant future. But even in that situation, you're still going to have the taste. You're still going to have the discipline to sit down and actually do all of the prompting and all the querying. But the opportunity is already there for those who want to commit to it.
Yeah, I think some of those same thoughts came out when Thomas and I recorded an episode a little while back about whether ChatGPT was going to take all the jobs. And, we talked about, no, we don't think that's how it's going to work for various economic reasons. But I like that you're saying that, because I think one thing that people underestimate is that it's going to drive the barrier to entry far, far lower. And it's going to enable a lot of people who otherwise wouldn't be able to teach themselves just by interacting with this machine. They can get much, much better. They might be able to become world-class coders, and they'll know how to use the artificial intelligence as well as a tool. Maybe in the end, it gets so good that there's just not much for people to do, but I feel like that's probably a ways away, given how it's all playing out now that we have had a year or two to look at it and kind of mess around with it and see how people are integrating it and the impact it's having on workflows. It also levels up the humans if they use it correctly. And
totally,
that's very fascinating as well.
The thing that it is also doing that I hadn't thought about until last week when I heard this story is it's democratizing the international playing field quite a bit. My friend has an employee I think he's from Asia, and so English isn't his first language. And so there was a bunch of things in his business related to like customers and sales and stuff that he kind of just couldn't let this guy do, because the people on the other end could tell that English wasn't his first language. It made a lot of awkward conversations or whatever. This guy just started running all of his things he was going to say through ChatGPT, getting it corrected to proper English, and then sending it. And my friend said, you can't even tell this guy has English as a second language anymore. He just sounds like an American. And so now he can do all of this sales work and marketing work and customer support work that he couldn't do literally a month ago, because his English is just automatically getting corrected by this tool. And he's apparently getting better at English through doing it. Like he's picking it up in the same like weird osmosis-y way that I was talking about. And so that's really, really interesting, where if a language being second is no longer like a barrier to doing business in that language, that gets kind of cool too.
Yeah, it's always seemed to me that our idea of what constitutes an accomplishment continues to grow. Since we accomplish so many more things, our end goal just goes up exponentially. And so over our lifetime, I mean, even 20 years from now, we'll probably be able to accomplish 20 times as much as a person can today. Or maybe even more. And so we won't take on these little projects. We'll take on the mega projects and even the giga projects out there. And that's, I think the world gets formed around a lot of these super massive giga projects out there. And I'm not talking about the line, because I think that's going to fail, but that's the difference.
Yeah, well, it reminds me of, I'm sure you've seen a version of this, which is like, Bertrand Russell published his In Praise of Idleness essay in the 20s or 30s or whenever, and he said, if with all these new advances in engineering and electricity, then pretty soon people will only have to work 20 hours a week in order to, afford, the wonderful lifestyle that we have today, and they can spend the rest of their time enjoying their leisure. And that obviously didn't happen, right? People still work 40-hour work weeks. They work a lot more. But the counterpoint I heard to that, which is really interesting, is that if you wanted to live the life that Bertrand Russell had in the 20s or whenever it was, you would probably only have to work like 5 or 10 hours a week, right? Mm-hmm. Because you'd be in a much smaller house. You'd have no air conditioning. You probably wouldn't have like much of a car. You wouldn't have a computer. You wouldn't have a phone. You wouldn't have like all of these things that we have today. You'd have this much simpler, much poorer life. And you can have that life. People don't want that life because now we can have this incredible, richer life. And so the quality of life will continue to go up as we take on these bigger and bigger projects, as our productivity gets like multiplied exponentially. And so hopefully just like lifts everybody up as work changes with it.
Yeah, I think people underestimate how much better the future can be, because Bertrand Russell probably thought, well, this is as good as it's ever been. Like, how could it possibly be any better? But he couldn't fathom the computer and the internet, and let alone ChatGPT or any of this other stuff. So look, once those options become available, people say, yeah, no, I want that. I want all that stuff. That all looks great. And I also think they underestimate the extent to which we're status-driven creatures. Like, nobody wants to be shuffling around the quad dressed like Bertrand Russell, when everybody else is driving a Tesla or whatever. It's like those games.
Dressing like him might be a vibe. That might be kind of cool. I feel like you could get away with the dressing part.
The professorial vibe. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
No, but I mean, just imagine, it's like there's this wonderful book, Where's My Flying Car?
Yeah.
He makes this point that if hardware had grown the same way software has, your iPhone would never need to be charged, and your Tesla could drive 1 million miles before it died. And those are actually things that are very possible if we made progress in these things like nuclear energy and all that. And it's like that future could happen in our lifetimes, right? It's like, what happens if your iPhone never needs to be charged, has 1 million times the processing power that it currently has, and just like everything is just like hyper interconnected? Like, it's impossible to imagine what that world looks like, right? It's like Snow Crash or Damon on steroids. And we're all going to have to dramatically level up our individual productivity and our power consumption and generation to get there. But like, that world can happen.
And let's hope that it does. And let's hope this podcast
I'm excited for it.
Just the tiniest part in pushing all that forward. Nat, it's been great. Do you have okay, so obviously, we want people, and it's not going to do this, so I have to caress it to get it. It's crypto confidential. Yeah, but even if it didn't blur, I would still do that to the book, because that's how good the book is. Crypto confidential, but Nat Eliason, winning and losing billions in the new frontier of finance. It's out when? Soon, right?
July 9th. Yeah, very soon.
Okay, so we are recording this on June 26th. This will come out before the book is out, I believe, next week or something like that. Cool. Yeah, so definitely pre-order it and buy it. It's a lot of fun. I found it just funny in parts and terrifying in parts and tragic in parts. And it really does do a good job of capturing the whole holy shit, I can't believe I made/lost that much money vibe that permeated crypto around that time. So I hope everybody will check it out. Nat, you also have, is it nateliason.com? You've got a long-standing website with lots and lots of stuff on it.
Well, yeah, I've been doing the vlogging thing since 2013 now. So there's a lot there. Most of it's on my Substack now, just blog.nateliason. But yeah, I'd say check out the book. If you're super in crypto already, you're probably going to feel very seen and like, oh, good, I wasn't the only one who did some of that stupid shit. and also, it's like, I mean, I think this is the first like very mass market targeted pro crypto book. We had some like the big, more anti-crypto books come out last year about that time period. So, and if you don't know anything about crypto, you're still going to have a lot of fun because it's written for you too. So, yeah.
Well, I had a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun reading it. I had a lot of fun in this conversation. Thanks a lot, Nat. Everybody go check it out.